Hey guys, welcome to For Collectors for Collectors. This is going to be a series which I'm going to work on with a friend of mine's, and that is none other than Sammy Thunder. Sammy Thunder is someone that I've respected in the hobby for a while. I like the way he collects. He also deals on the side, so he does a lot of avenues. How you doing, Sammy?
Hey, James, thanks so much.
Yeah,
Thanks for having me here.
you know, pleasure is all mine. Just to give you a little briefing, me and Sammy got into a little bit of conversation trying to figure out what avenues, because we wanted to work on something together. But eventually, we started talking about growing up in New York. So, what do you remember? What years do you remember growing up as a New Yorker?
Pretty much I was, growing up was mostly early 90s. I'm a 90s kid. That's where I remember growing up a lot. And since, this um, the whole community is about baseball and sports in general, collecting, uh, that kind of was the centerfold of my experience growing up in New York is playing little league, playing youth basketball, card shows at the county center. So there's a lot of good history in New York in terms of what my '90s experience was like.
Yeah. And you just missed the 80s with the Mets being on top of the world. In the
Hmm.
90s, they were going through a little bit of a downturn. But then towards, what was it, 98-ish, they started getting things into a rhythm and getting better again. That's what you mainly remember?
Yeah, it's funny. Like as you know, like the early '90s, both the Yankees and the Mets were not in the greatest shape. It's funny because I think in the '90s, I wasn't a Mets fan immediately. I actually was, for whatever reason, I was a big fan of Danny Tartabull when he was with the Yankees because I
Hmm.
always I loved players that were hitting home runs, and Tartabull was a guy that would just always hit home runs. Um, but it wasn't until kind of like I'd say the mid '90s where I started kind of finding more of an allegiance with the Mets, and so you know, a lot of that misanthropic connection with the Mets kind of still lingers to this day because we're Mets fans. We're one of the we hope for the best, but we expect the worst, but we hope for the best. That's our kind of mantra that we hope for, that we think.
Yeah. And then with basketball, Knicks fan, I'm guessing?
I will root for the Knicks, but since my dad grew up loving Larry Bird, I kind of by proxy grew up a Celtics fan. Um,
Mhm.
but I mean, that being said, the New York Knicks '90s teams were amazing, and I always felt for them because they could just never get over the hump past the Bulls. It would always just never just work out for them.
Yeah, that was pretty much like the championship series was because after the Knicks, it was like smooth sailing for the Bulls after
I
that.
know. It was great. I mean, that was a great time in the '90s for basketball. For if you were a New York Knicks fan, I mean, that was a great time to be a fan of them. Probably the best times, actually. I mean, even though they didn't win a championship, year after year, they were just always in the mix.
Yeah, and then they went up against the Heat, which was a bitter rivalry with them, and it was
Yeah.
just fun times. They couldn't get over the hump with the Rockets. Elijah one had
Ugh.
'em.
That should have been their year. That really should have been their year.
Yeah.
And they almost lost actually when Jordan left. I mean, that should have been the opportunity, and they almost lost against the Bulls with Pippen leading the charge. I mean,
Hmm.
that goes to show you, man. I mean, like the Knicks are great, but I mean, you can't take the Bulls for granted, even if Jordan isn't there.
Right. They still had a great team.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
Pippen showed he can lead a team too.
right. So for future reference, I do plan on doing basketball content with Sammy because I love basketball also. I just never have the excuse to do basketball, and I'm so like chomping at the bits and salivating because Sammy is a big basketball fan. He does a lot of basketball cards in his in his videos, and that's why I liked watching his stuff. Yep, there you go.
The rulers.
And,
Everybody knows I love the rulers.
yeah, the rulers and the big cards. It's just cool cards. The vintage. There you go.
There you
Lou
go.
Alcindor. Oh
We'll get
man,
into that at some point.
exactly. But going back to baseball, so it's the late 90s, and how did you feel trying to get over the hump with the hated Braves?
I knew it was a lost cause. For whatever reason, my whenever I think of that time frame, I mean, obviously you can think of the big four with Maddox, Smoltz, Glavine, and either it kind of rotated, whether it was like Denny Nagel or Steve Avery,
Mm-hmm.
Mark Wohlers. It depends on which year it was. But the one player that I think of a lot at least in the well, if we're talking about the late '90s, I guess there's John Rocker, who is obviously controversial in his own right. But
Right.
the one closer that I think about, and maybe it's not late '90s, is Steve Bedrosian.
Um,
Um, he was their closer, and for whatever reason, as a kid, I always remembered him just shutting the door on the Mets every time and making them just pack up and go home. I mean, anytime I saw him come in, I was like, "Oh, all right, this game's over." Doesn't matter if it's the playoffs or the regular season. Bedrosian always knocked him out. But yeah, to answer your question, the Braves and the Mets, it was like David versus Goliath, unfortunately for them. And the Mets were, just not in the same league as the Braves at that time. Just they weren't there.
right. And then we have like the late 90s where the Mets are starting to do well and the Yankees are in the middle of their dynasty. So they were like the little brother to the Yankees. And you didn't have no superstars, but then you finally trade for Mike Piazza. How did that
Yeah,
feel? What do you remember about that?
that I was elated. I remember I was with with my grandfather, and we heard the news, and we were both excited about it. My grandfather grew up a Giants fan, and when the Giants and the Dodgers moved, the Mets were kind of born in the ashes, and so my grandfather kind of transitioned his allegiance over to the Mets, and going forward from there, it was I just remember the Mike Piazza trade being unbelievable, and I remember listening to the WFAN, and people say like Mike Francesa had a huge impact on that, and maybe he did because I mean, he's the number one sports guy in the country at the time, and Mike and the Mad Dog, and they were talking about Mike Piazza being traded, and I wouldn't be surprised if he had some influence on that. So short answer is I was very very excited. I was curious to see how he would fit in with New York because there's always that that misanthropic. I use that word again. There's always that feeling that certain superstars who are very successful in other areas come to New York and their career plummets. But in this
Mhm.
case, Piazza, he was the exception.
He shined for the Mets. I couldn't believe it. I remember the first time when they got Piazza, like everyone, they show footage of them crossing the bridge to enter Shea Stadium,
Yeah,
and that footage, for whatever reason, was seared in my mind. While like, wow, they're suddenly like relevant all over again because of Piazza. That's unbelievable. And people coming in droves just to watch Piazza, this half man, half amazing, best offensive catcher in baseball at the time.
yeah.
And you could plug him in 3, 4 hole, and he was just gonna now be a force in your lineup. That was something that I never forgot. And like you said, Mike and the Mad Dog, they took it to another level because it was must listen to radio back then.
Piazza was a force. There's no denying that, and he was their guy. He was the glue that kind of pulled that team together. When it comes to his success, I mean, there's no denying that when he retired, that he retired a Met. I think that was the right choice, not a Dodger. Um,
Mm,
I mean, I was like I said, I was skeptical, but in the long run, obviously, he turned out to be every bit he earned, like all the money that he earned, he earned.
mm.
He, he helped get the Mets to the World Series, and that was pretty much,
That was worth it.
the whole slogan. You got to believe. Like
Mm,
you had the Miracle Mets in '69, and then you got to believe in 2000. So you know that's and it was surprising because the Mets had the better record that year against compared to the Yankees. The Mets were statistically the better team when it came to the standings.
yeah. So now I guess you're already moving us along to 2000. 2000 was a pretty epic year on its own, following 98, which was a pretty great year. In 2000, I remember the whole season was a pretty great season. The Giants just went into their new stadium. There
Hmm.
was like a buzz with baseball in general, like attendance was up. It was like
Hmm.
a resurgence after 90, what was it, 94, when they went on strike.
Right.
It was now it was like finally baseball was back front and center stage. It was fun to be at with the, and then the offense was like unheard of. I think in 2000 I had the highest run scored per game or something like that in years. So it was like offense was great, a lot of great teams all over the map, and it was exciting times. And then the Mets, I remember one other big person you guys added was Mike Hampton, and
Yeah.
he's a big difference.
He was great. Obviously, in the long run, he didn't turn out to be like the big prospect that everybody that thought he would be. I know he went to the Rockies, I think, after. He
Mm,
went to a bunch of teams. I think he went to the Braves, the Rockies, but listen, for the Mets, he was great. He did, he played his role. He fit really well. I mean, he was a young cat at that time. Then you had veterans like Al Leiter, who kind of just I know he played for the Yankees, but like the attitude that he had with the Mets in that Subway Series, or just in the year in general, was just the passion of the underdog. A guy who is just putting everything that he has into that year because he wants to be a winner. He wants to win. And as a Mets fan, you gotta love that attitude because you're playing for a team that has been scratching and clawing all this way. So when I remember as a kid watching Al Leiter pitch, and he had just that old school windup that you don't really see anymore, where that leg comes all the way out and up, and and he was throwing fire, and you gotta love it. So that was just an experience. I remember it's just Al Leiter's spunk and attitude was really encouraging to see that year.
yeah, I remember that was also the year Griffey went to the Reds, so he changed teams. He had a good year with the Reds that year. A-Rod was a superstar, so he was still taking the Mariners. Him and Edgar Martinez was still doing their thing for the Mariners. And yeah, the Braves were still the Braves. The Cardinals, Rick Ankiel was actually like an ace that whole year. And he was almost unhittable at times. You remember Rick Ankiel?
Yeah, sure. Rick Ankiel, I know he started as a pitcher and had a good bat on him as well. He can hit the ball. But unfortunately, I know it didn't work out for him ultimately. He ended up becoming an outfielder and actually had I don't know if he had I think he had I know he had a good year. I don't know how many, I don't know if it was repeated, but I know he had at least one good year where he had like, I don't know, 16 home runs, maybe
I
60,
think it was
70 RBIs or something like that. But
I think it was in the 20s. He had like
yeah,
28 homes or something.
okay, maybe it's more, but I just yeah, it's incredible. I was unheard of at that time to see a pitcher go become a hitter because it seemed like things were so stagnant then. If you were a pitcher, you were a pitcher. You were not known for being a good hitter. If you're a second baseman, you're not really a power hitter, and so there was just certain expectations. So
Right. And he could have been like almost the first Shohei Ohtani where
got a
he
cat,
was a
so forgive me.
lethal bat. Where he was a lethal bat and still
Yeah.
performed well as a pitcher. So I always felt like he could have been the first one
Yep.
to be garnering that spotlight.
I think so. Yeah, he was definitely on that same stratosphere at times.
Yeah.
Forgive me. My cat is making an appearance. His name is Mr. Bones. He's gonna just hang out with us for now.
Mr. Bones wants to talk about the rivalry that was the Yankees and Mets. So
Yeah.
I'm gonna bring up a few cards here,
Hmm.
and I guess you can either talk about them, remember, see if there's any it jogs any memories
Yeah.
of the 2000 year, and then
Hmm.
also you could maybe fill in the blanks with other players. I don't have players like Benny Agbayani, which I remember he was a big time player for the Mets. Benny and the
Yeah.
Mets.
Yeah.
Was he one of your favorites?
Not really, but I mean, as a Mets fan, I remember when he'd come up to hit, he would use the theme song "Benny and the Jets" by Elton John, and
Hmm.
so everybody just he was like one of those fan favorite players. Like he wasn't a stud, but he played his role well and came up with big hits at times, and he was a decent outfielder. So go with
Yeah.
that.
So, all right. This guy was a force for you guys. And I'll just maybe let me see if I bring this up here like this. Okay. So, Edgardo Alfonso.
Fonzie. So
Yes.
yeah, uh, I mean, second baseman who can hit. I don't know if his defense was that great. I think it was average. But Fonzie, I think he was selected for an All-Star team or a couple maybe at times. But um, he was great. I think he batted second. I think maybe second or fifth or something like that. But yeah, Fonzie was great, man. I mean, exactly the kind of player we needed at the time to lead us, into that World Series. Uh, yeah, just I mean, and also when COVID was really at its height, I paid Fonzie to do one of those cameos that they're doing for my grandfather's birthday, and he did it. So I give ultimate thumbs up for Fonzie.
That's cool. That's so cool.
Hmm.
How about this player? What does he remind you of?
Ooh, defense, the hot glove. Ray Ordonez, man, he couldn't hit for a lick, but guy could play defense. And like I said, when you need the right formula, Ray Ordonez can be a guy that can get a walk. He can hit a single. Don't expect him to hit a home run. When it happens, Mets fans will go crazy because like that's just an added bonus at that point. But yeah, Ordonez, you know, he proves that you don't have to be a great hitter to be in the league. Your glove can do all the talking for you.
Right. All right. So I'm gonna switch it up. I'm going to show other players for the Yankees because it was a Subway Series.
Yeah,
What do you think about when you see this guy right here?
Posada is one of those guys who not the greatest defensive catcher, but he was a solid bat. I know I think you and Mike Moynihan talked a little bit about Posada as far as potential Hall of Famer. I think at times it was. I think it's very difficult to kind of put that in perspective because of the effect that Jeter and Mariano Rivera had on that team, and if you can't put Pettit in the Hall of Fame, which I think he kind of earns it more so than Posada does in terms of uh, the impact on the game, then but Posada is somebody that I think was scary to see up at bat with runners on. So, but yeah, I mean, obviously one of the greater Yankee catchers, behind Yogi Berra, obviously, but he's up there.
Okay. How about let's get this back the way it was, just for the viewers.
Tino. What a great pickup for the Yankees. He I know he had good years with the Mariners, but it's just right place, right time. And Tino's a guy that came into the league and or came into the Yankees and clearly um, was a guy that could play in a big city like New York and not feel the pressure. And I think maybe it kind of helps when you have, Jeter and Bernie Williams, these guys who have been on the Yankees who kind of take on a bigger responsibility. So it kind of puts the pressure off Tino. But
Mhm.
that's the great thing about that is that Tino, when the pressure's off, he's just who he is. And the guy hit like what 20 plus home runs, 100 RBIs for them. So yeah, Tino again, like that whole Yankee lineup in the '90s was scary, and Tino was there, man. I mean, Tino was a threat, just like any of the other guys. But he didn't,
Yeah.
so.
All right, let's go back to your Mets. What kind of memories does this guy give you?
Oh man, Robin Ventura. Um, Obviously, everybody remembers Ventura for the Nolan Ryan fight with when he was with the White Sox. Ventura. I wish I had I know he was. Look, I know he was great with the Mets. Solid third baseman and he hit for power, which is great. He fit in well. I think him and Piazza were guys that were responsible for the long ball. I wish I could remember more about him, um, but there's certain players I just have a more of a connection with. Ventura was never really one of those guys, but I remember him being very impactful, and I know he had a home run in the Subway Series, so I know he was very much involved in the formula for making the Mets great during that time.
Yeah, he was. All right, I got another one for you. This guy right here was someone that Mets fans loved. What thoughts does
Oh, the captain. He was the captain. Then David Wright became the captain, and then we haven't had a captain since. John Franco, yeah, I love this statistic about him. Um, he leads the Mets and the Reds in all-time saves, which is pretty remarkable for a guy who's not in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah,
Uh, yeah, so John Franco, a workhorse. That's what I remember a lot about him. He was he was not a guy that had overpowering stuff, but he just had charisma and another fan favorite for the Mets. He's not a guy that was a guy who was there to play, to pitch and play baseball, and that was I think Mets fans gravitated with that.
do you remember Mike and the Mad Dog when the Mets were playing against the Giants in the playoffs and he struck out? Barry Bonds caught him looking, and how Mad Dog was going nuts. Can you please hit the ball? Can you please swing the bat?
I know he's because I know Mad Dog's a huge Giants fan, so that must have irked him. I do remember that. That was yeah. That was. I remember hearing about it the next day, and watching it on TV. It's like I didn't think anybody could strike out Bonds at that time. So that was really really cool to see.
It was must watch, much listened to, because just to see him get worked up with his Giants, they could never get to that crescendo of
Right.
success. It was just hilarious to me that he would be like scorned all the time
Right.
and
Well, I
always.
mean, there was obviously that big moment where he has that tirade, that famous tirade that everyone knows about, where he wants to win a World Series and the Giants keep letting him down. And it's
Mhm.
funny because it was only maybe a couple years or a year later where they finally did win a World Series for him.
Yeah, yeah.
So
So, all right, so we get into the World Series, Mets and Yankees. What do you remember the buzz like when they finally clashed and they were going to meet in the World Series? What do you remember?
I mean, must-watch TV. It was it made baseball. Baseball was a lot of hello. Baseball was everybody was watching it. I mean, because it hasn't happened. I think it was like I can't remember how many years prior, but there was a huge gap in between Subway Series, and so that was like to have the Yankees and the Mets together was a big deal. Um, obviously the first game was, I think if fate were to work out the Mets in the Mets way, they would have won Game One, or at least made it, at least taken it to extra innings if Timo Perez understood or had a better idea of that Todd Zeal double, or what or would have been a double or a triple. I mean, he would have
Inches.
scored that. He would have scored from first, but unfortunately, just gravity took hold and pulled that ball back in. So
How did you feel when you saw that? Were you screaming at the TV?
I was ecstatic at first because I was like, oh, it's gone, it's gone. Two runs on the 2 runs right there. We're good. I mean, runs are so World Series scoring runs early in the game is so impactful and so necessary, to be able to kind of take control. And so when I saw that happen, oh, sorry, my cat's going nuts. When I saw that happen, when I saw Timo Perez get thrown out at home, and that was it, I was just like, "Come on, man! Like I get it. You're in the moment. You're in the moment. You feel like it's going to go, but this is the World Series. You have to just run with with your when your life depends on it. With 2 outs, 2 outs.
Right.
Ugh,
I I'll be honest with you, the Yankees didn't deserve game 1. They didn't deserve it. The Mets, I felt like outplayed them, and starting with that, the play there, that was like a gift from the
oh yeah,
gods. Like, they didn't
yeah,
deserve that, and then it was tied. Um, I think the Yankees kept clawing back to tie the game or whatever, and then they finally won it in extra innings. I just felt like that should have been a run there.
yeah,
You know, they had no right to go to extra innings. The Mets were the better team that game, and I felt like we stole one. Like, the Yankees didn't win.
yeah.
You guys beat yourselves, and it probably
Happens repeatedly.
prevented. Yeah, it probably prevented the series to have that extra juice it should have had, because it
Yeah.
was only a 5-game series. But had you won that one, I think it could have been a 7-game series.
Well, I mean, I don't want to go too. I don't want to go off the Subway Series, but like 2015, there was the same situation. The Mets, well, not exactly. Like obviously, it wasn't a home run or anything, but the Mets had what, like a 4-2 lead or something like that going into the top of the ninth, or I can't remember if they were in New York or Kansas City, but they're going in, and what's his name? Familia was coming in to pitch, and he's knocking stuff over now. Uh, Familia was coming in to pitch, and he gave up. He gave up the game tying home run, and then the Royals took it over, and they took it over, and they won Game One because of that. And so, it's like a curse. The Mets cannot win a Game One, in the 21st century, or the beginning of the 21st century. So I think
Yeah,
it's a turning point. It is sort of a turning point when things like that sort of happen, or Mets fans could immediately jump to it being a turning point, even though it's the first game. But every moment counts, and those sort
right.
of things can really just affect a team mentally.
Yeah, and then we move into game 2, and the Mets are trying to even the score. And the matchup is Roger Clemens versus Piazza, basically. Not the Mets versus Piazza, because early in the season,
Yeah,
Roger Clemens, he gives Piazza a concussion. He's out for like 2 months practically, right?
yeah. No, he was knocked out, and his eyes were kind of open, and he was kind of just looking up, and everybody was freaked out because obviously this is your star, this is the guy, and you don't want your guy to go down. And it became obviously the big matchup between the two. And Clemens, known for his overpowering stuff and being at the time the most dominant pitcher, and so this kind of goes back, like game one was really important. And we beat Pettit. We need to beat Pettit. We need to have leverage because going into game two, Clemens is not going to, make it easy. So, with his split finger and his fastball and I think he had a change up as well. It was, it was important. But to going back to Piazza, yeah, I mean, obviously that was the big matchup, and we knew that Piazza had Clemens' number and was able to get the best of him. But obviously, we know what happened.
So wait, what did you feel then when Piazza breaks the bat and then you see Clemens throw the bat towards whatever Piazza's foot? Like, what were you thinking when you saw that? Like, this guy's crazy.
You know, uh, Clemens. I thought I was mad. I was upset because this is just Piazza. This has obviously become personal,
Right.
and Clemens makes up a horrible lie, and we can see right through it. Yeah, there you go. The two kahunas of the teams. I mean, listen, we all know the reality of what it was. I mean, Clemens just instinctively got upset because probably in his mind he thought like, oh, Piazza, he hit it, he broke the bat on purpose, and it came towards me. He was just getting back at me, and so his instinct was just to throw it out of frustration and anger. And Piazza was just like, why is this? What are you doing, man? Why are you what? I think it was just like a little bit of adrenaline, maybe. And so he, he just went off instinct probably, and upset and just so upset everybody in that moment. So I mean, I'm not saying this as a Mets fan, but Clemens was completely in the wrong for that.
Well, he was, I'll be the first to say I didn't like Roger Clemens, even when he was a Yankee, because before, when he had a choice to either sign with Toronto or the Yankees, he signs with Toronto for more money because Scott Boras basically doesn't allow his players to take less money,
Right,
so they can set the bar. And
right.
then when the Yankees trade for him out of Toronto, he says, I always wanted to be a Yankee.
Hmm.
And that rubbed me so the wrong way because I just thought he's just a character. He's disingenuous. He's just a hired mercenary. If he wanted to be a Yankee, he could have been a Yankee 3 years prior, but
Right.
instead he went to Toronto. So that's when I was just like, whatever, like, just play, don't talk. I don't want to hear from you. And then Piazza treats him as a whipping boy because Piazza had like 3 home runs. He batted like 500 against him.
Yeah,
So Roger Clemens had no answer for Piazza, and Piazza, by the way, was like at his peak at that time.
he
Like
was. Yeah, that was. She was
Piazza
coming
was
off
a
it.
beast. And
Yeah,
then when he came back, like headed towards the playoffs, was when he came back. He wasn't really the same Piazza yet. He was still getting his rhythm back, and
hmm.
then suddenly he starts hitting a few home runs. And I remember in the dugout they said, "Let they uncaged the beast" or something like that, right? What was it that they said?
I can't remember, to be honest. I unfortunately there's certain parts of history I just can't remember with the Subway Series, but something
Well, it
along
was
those
something
lines.
like that. Yeah, it was something like they let loose the beast, and then he
Yeah,
just went on a tear throughout the playoffs all over again.
yeah,
Yeah,
remarkable.
it was something to see them two like alter egos or nemesis. And Piazza didn't like Clemens whatsoever, but Clemens did his thing. He did, and they take game two.
They
So
did,
then
yeah,
on to game three, and the Mets pulled that one out.
they did. I mean, that's the thing is that every game was close, so it wasn't like this kind of goes back to teams kind of you can have a really like a poor record, but if your team comes in and starts playing cohesively, you can really go far and just start dominating. But yeah, I will say that every game was close. Game three was even close. But yeah, the Mets were able to slip through that one and kind of get back into the series, and that was what we needed at that moment.
Right, right. And one of the players that I remember rooting for back when they got this guy. Let me see if I got a bunch of cards here. Here he goes. El
El
sorry.
Duque.
El Duque.
What is he, like 8-1 or something like that in playoff wins or something like that? Or he was just so dominant.
He was so good.
Yeah, in the
And I think
playoffs.
that's who you beat. I think it was in game 3 was him. You
Yeah, I don't
beat
did he I don't think he took the loss though, did he?
No, because it was a close game.
Yeah,
And
I think it was somebody else who took the loss.
right, right. But he was one of my favorites. Crafty, um,
Yeah.
had the high leg kick, and
Yep.
he kept
Nasty
everyone on
slider,
a
I think.
rocket here. Hmm.
Nasty slider.
Nasty slider, and then it was just all right. Now it's a series. It should have
Hmm.
been 2-1 Mets, though. In all honesty,
Yeah, going back to game one.
yeah, I still don't think the Yankees deserved that game, but it should have been 2-1. And then the Yankees come in game 4, and Jeter just took over at that point. I think hit a
Oh
home
yeah.
first inning,
Yeah.
and he never looked back after that.
No, Jeter, I mean, I was watching a documentary recently about the Subway Series, just kind of getting back into the mode of kind of preparing for our conversation. And for the 30 minutes of it was, a game 1 through 3 was not, they didn't mention Jeter once, and then game 4 comes, and then all of a sudden Jeter becomes the big name. And that's
Yeah,
remarkable from a Yankees perspective, because really, I mean, Jeter was the guy for that in that team. And I think I remember there was something, he went up to Joe Torre before game 4, and he told him, um, you know, uh, what do you say, Skip or something like that. I don't know if he called him Skip or something, but
Mr.
he's like,
Torrey.
Joe, he might have just
Mhm.
said, Joe, I got this. We got this one for you tonight. And he went out and obviously hit the home run. And listen, you can say whatever you want about Jeter, but he, when it comes to his clutch and his perseverance, the guy can do it. He was a world class player. So
Yeah.
as a Mets fan, you gotta tip your cap to him. So
Yeah, so then it was after that, it was just 3-1. And it was just a mere formality to win the fourth game. It was a shame because I really thought it should have been like a 7-game series.
yeah,
Yankees take it and claim the city basically, but the 2000 year was something else, man. It was something else. And when we were talking and reminiscing on Mike and the Mad Dog, how they debated, and
hmm,
it was helpful that the Yankees were successful at that time. So it
yeah,
was just, constant hot take, and then, having the city all into it, calling up and
hmm,
getting their 2 cents in. It was fun. But 2000, I barely ever talk about that year because, especially out here with collecting and everything, there was no
yeah.
need. So you brought it up, and it's just like, wow, that was a great year. That was a really great year.
It was. I mean, oh, I mean, because I remember, I was playing a lot. I was playing. I think it was like, I was probably playing like freshman year of high school baseball at the time, and everybody was glued on the Subway Series, because like the teams that I ran were split, like Mets and Yankees fans. So it was definitely a tense situation watching those games, but there's nothing else like it at that time. Being in New York and seeing the like families that were split down the middle in terms of teams. And so, like, I remember my grandfather would mention growing up and having to go through the same situation, whether it being like the New York Giants or the Yankees or what have you. But yeah, definitely, it was cool to live through that and to be able to see it happen. Because I mean, I don't know if it's going to happen again, but we'll see. I mean, we were close, but last year I think, but with both teams making it, but just didn't happen.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. True. And then I guess the equivalent to that would be the Jets and the Giants making the Super Bowl, which be harder, I would say. I
Oh
won't say
God, don't get me started.
that.
Don't get me started. Oh Jesus, what a complete meltdown for both teams. Really, more so for the Jets and the Giants, because at least the Giants still have their quarterback. But my God, that's a whole other conversation for this channel.
Do you root for one or the other when it?
No, not really. I mean, you hear about it all the time now on radio. So, but like by proxy, I'm a Ravens fan because my wife's from Maryland. But I lived in New Orleans long enough where I'm a Saints fan. So, I root for the Saints.
Oh, okay. It's a good organization. They have a good team this year too.
Who Dat Nation, man? It's Who Dat Nation.
One of the best
It's
defenses. I have their defense in my fantasy league, and they're pretty good.
not a
Pretty good
bad
defense.
choice.
Yeah, but they lost the last game.
Yeah, it was close. It was close though.
Yeah. So anywho, so I guess that's gonna bring a curtain down on this discussion. But I do want to let you know, with the four collectors, we do plan on doing a lot more content where we're going to revisit
Oh boy.
basketball times.
Yeah.
We're gonna do a draft in our future video.
Yes.
We're gonna do a
I'm looking
draft.
forward to that.
We're gonna do a draft where we're gonna draft two teams, one Team Thunder and one Team Elite, and then we're gonna basically talk about why we chose those players, who we probably considered, and
hmm
then we're gonna actually have a debate on which team would beat which team. And we're going to try to do that live so that people could chime in and say who they might have drafted per position.
Right.
And maybe they could help with the debate on which team would be the better team. And then we also want to do something in the future where we discuss rotations, because Sammy, another thing I like about his channel is he likes to discuss rotations and pitchers, and some of your favorite players are Nolan Ryan and Tom Seaver, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Nolan Ryan, Tom Seaver, Bob Gibson, all the great pitchers from the day.
Yeah, so I love that also because a lot of the pitchers don't get their notoriety that they deserve. So we actually were in discussion about breaking down some of the best rotations in the history of, I guess, the post-war era, right? Because we can't go too deep, right?
No, I mean we could, but yeah, that would we'd be going into the weeds on that one. So
We're no experts by no means.
no.
But yeah, I'd love to get into that discussion, debate, and see where we could take it. But yeah, I definitely want to do a lot with you, Sammy, in the future, and I hope you guys are looking forward to it.
Absolutely. And I'll try to keep Mr. Bones out of the way because I know he definitely interfered a lot with this, but I think he just wants to be known as well. But yeah, next time around I'll keep the cats out. So
Well, so that'll put a bow ribbon on this one. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Go sub up Sammy Thunder if you're not subbed up to Sammy Thunder. He's also doing content with us here. So, watch some of his previous videos, and he's a real cool collector, and he also sets up at shows. So maybe you'll see him at a show.
absolutely. Thanks so much, James.
All right. So with that being said, I want you guys to keep collecting. Stay tuned to 4 Collectors for more future content. Gotta go.